Tonight on Primetime, back from the brink. The United States and Iran agree a ceasefire after days of intensifying confrontation. A temporary pause is now in place, with cautious optimism that diplomacy may yet take hold. Fresh hope then for the region and the global economy. Good evening. After days of escalating tensions and fears of a wider regional conflict, there are signs of a possible pause in hostilities. A temporary window has emerged for diplomacy, but uncertainty remains over whether it can hold.
The United States and Iran have agreed to a conditional 2-week ceasefire, brokered with Pakistan just hours before a US deadline for potential large-scale strikes. President Donald Trump announced the pause on social media, saying attacks on Iran would be suspended for 2 weeks if Tehran immediately and safely reopens the strategic Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping. The ceasefire suspends military action on both sides and sets the stage for broader peace talks. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif proposed the truce, saying it would give diplomacy a chance to bring the war to a complete halt. Sharif asked the US to extend the deadline and urged Tehran to resume shipping through the strait. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran will halt attacks if the US and its allies do the same, allowing safe passage through the strait, but only with coordination from Iran's armed forces. He thanked Pakistan for mediating and stressed that the truce is temporary, not a full end to the conflict. In his official statement, Trump said the ceasefire followed talks with Sharif and Pakistan's Field Marshal Asim Munir. He called it a double-sided ceasefire, saying the US had met its military objectives. Trump added that Iran had submitted a 10-point proposal providing a workable basis for negotiations, and the 2-week pause would allow the agreement to be finalized, marking progress toward long-term peace in the Middle East. Israel backed the US pause in strikes. In a statement, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office clarified the ceasefire does not cover fighting in Lebanon, despite Pakistan's earlier claim that the truce applied everywhere, including Lebanon. Israel said it supports halting attacks only if Iran immediately reopens the strait and stops assaults on the US, Israel, and regional partners. Netanyahu added the move aligns with Trump's goal of preventing Iran from posing nuclear, missile, or terror threats to the region. Iran said talks with the US would begin Friday in Islamabad. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in-person discussions are not yet confirmed. Analysts caution that while the pause reduces immediate risks, the broader conflict and negotiations remain fragile.
Well, global markets are starting to react after weeks of disruption. Critical supplies have been hit very hard, from fertilizers, crucial for food production, to helium used in semiconductors. The big question now, of course, is how quickly can things stabilize? Well, joining me is Giacomo Prandelli, a commodity analyst and geopolitical strategist based in Lugano, Switzerland. Giacomo, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Let's look at commodities overall to begin with. How bad has this disruption been? And is it too early yet to really count the cost, do you think?
Hello, good evening. Thanks for having me. So, replying to your question quickly, I think like right now, what we saw in the latest hours was a sort of truce for 2 weeks, but still something big is happening right now. We saw what happened in Lebanon, so the attack from Israel, and also now in a massive pipeline that is bringing oil through the Suez Canal of the Saudi. There was just a drone attack, and also this one is going to escalate the conflict. Right now, the parties are asking to slow down and try to to accept the truth because from the Iranian minister now we're listening the fact that the Strait of Hormuz now is closed. So what we hope, and we were hoping in the latest hours about a new develop of this kind of war, and especially the oil flows is being blocked through the latest attacks.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, the whole world has been understandably worried about the flow of oil, focused on energy. But, of course, there are other commodities too that are just as important for survival. Helium, for example, fertilizer products. Just give us a sense of how important those commodities are and how close some countries, perhaps some sectors, got to disaster.
Yes, exactly. So when we speak about fertilizer and helium, we need to link those topics with LNG, the liquefied natural gas. And a main player, a key player is Qatar. We saw what happened in Qatar. We saw the strike on Ras Laffan, one of the bigger hubs worldwide in terms of gas. And they are a main export player in the LNG business. And we saw that mainly in Asia, when we speak about India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they started to shut down some plants that they are very important to make fertilizer, and this is strictly linked with the food industry. Of course, in the next harvest, we're going to see the effect of this shortage. And speaking about helium, is a strategic material, especially for the semiconductor industry. And also here, Qatar and the Gulf countries are exporting roughly 30% of the overall global exportation in the market. And based on that, it's another critical material. And right now, with the AI implementation, data center, and all the technology needs, I think that this is a huge miss. Of course, on the other end, we have US that is a key player for those products, especially linked with gas, and they're gonna take a big percentage of the market, big share, because what we saw in the Gulf that was being heated and it needs time to recover for it and rebuild and restore the production at higher capacity as it was before the war. You need to find new players, and US now is putting themselves in a position of taking this share.
And Giacomo, now that the route is thankfully starting to reopen, how quickly do you think things can settle down, and can they go back to some semblance of normality?
So hopefully it's going to be a positive outcome from this. But as we know, it's not like after a truce or this 2 weeks peace deal. I will say that this is not a fast outcome. We saw this morning that the market reacts very positively to the latest news. And we also were checking about the traffics of the oil vessels, and something was moving. But right now, seems that everything stopped. Why? Because of the latest attack of Israel in Lebanon, and we assume Iran in the East-West pipeline that is passing through Saudi Arabia.
And just quickly on the prices coming down, we have started to see some movement. Do you think volatility, though, is likely to stay for some time to come?
Absolutely, yes. So I think that's a very important question, especially related with the oil prices. Since the beginning of the conflict, the market reacted in a very fast way if we speak about the jump that we saw in the oil prices. After a certain point, also right now, we saw that the WTI just swap with the Brent prices. So usually the Brent is slightly higher in terms of prices than WTI, and now it's the opposite. Why? Because the US oil seems that is more safe and reliable. That's why the price is higher than the Brent, that is the most common known as worldwide oil when you need to track it. On top of that, we saw a huge drop in the prices. Now both of them are under 95 US dollar per barrels. The price dropped like 20% in the latest hours. This is a massive drop. We saw it last time during COVID, and but we still need to check what's going to happen, because right now seems very fragile, this piece, and so the prices can go back. Of course, as you asked me at the beginning of this interview, you asked me the damage on the infrastructure. This kind of damage and hit that the Gulf infrastructure got during this war is something that needs to be taken in account. And that's why also for the future, the oil production, gas exportation, the fossil fuels that are very important through those channel, I think we need to take in consideration also for future prices. So we will not see the oil prices as last year around 70 and 60 US dollar per barrel, but the target should be higher.
Yeah, as you say, prices might bounce back, but longer term market confidence is going to be harder, I guess, to achieve. Do you think this has exposed deeper weaknesses, perhaps, that were already present in global supply chains?
Yes, that's another important element. In the latest year, especially if we speak about oil and oil production, in the latest year, we saw a narrative about a possible oil glut and the fact that we're peaking the demand for oil. And so that's why most of the biggest oil and gas companies decided to slow down their capex and investment in new infrastructure to discover also new oil fields. I would say that this war is just getting this false storytelling a little bit more critical, because not only the oil production is going to reduce if we don't invest enough, and I'm speaking about the big oil companies, and this is going to take a lot of time. But also with the disruption and the fact that the Strait of Hormuz was closed for almost more than 1 month, and the facilities now are damaged, the overall oil supply is going to decrease. And that's why, on top of the fact that we are consuming more energy and the renewables energy are not going to take out the fossil fuels, but they will just add up the capacity, because we need more energy. I think we will face huge problems and huge issues in the oil exportation. Yes. That's why oil prices need to stay higher.
Yes, Giacomo, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Switzerland.
Thank you.
Okay, staying on this topic, Pakistan is at the centre of this major diplomatic breakthrough, announcing a ceasefire between the United States and Iran after weeks of rising tensions. Well, the focus now shifts to whether Islamabad can turn this moment into a lasting agreement. Hira Mustafa has more.
On the social media platform X, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said, "I'm pleased to announce that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, along with their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire in all theaters, including Lebanon and elsewhere, effective immediately." He also urged Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for 2 weeks. The ceasefire, agreed by both Iranian and U.S. leadership, has been a development welcomed across the region. Pakistani officials say all eyes are now on the Islamabad talks on Friday, which aim to turn the temporary ceasefire into lasting peace. While official delegations are unconfirmed, experts expect U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to participate. Pakistan has acted as a key intermediary in recent weeks, leveraging its historic ties with Iran. Stability in Iran is crucial for Islamabad, as it shares a 900 kilometers border with Iran, and there are risks of war spillover. The country was not alone in mediating the talks. It had backing from regional powers China, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia in brokering the ceasefire. Experts note that Islamabad still faces an uphill task bridging the deep trust gap between Washington and Tehran, with questions remaining over what the parties can agree on. Hera Mustafa, A News, Islamabad.
Well, Iran says it is now ready to engage directly with the United States over the conditions of this ceasefire, with talks expected in Islamabad through deep mistrust. Deep mistrust, though, still does exist between the two sides. And with all this going on, A News correspondent Turaj Shirililo has more now from Tehran.
The Supreme National Security Council of Iran has stressed that Tehran will solely talk with the U.S. side over ceasefire conditions laid down in a 10-point proposal relayed to the White House by Pakistani officials. As Iranian and U.S. negotiators are scheduled to meet in Islamabad, the top security authority also said that Iran will step into the negotiating room with the U.S. out of total distrust. It was referring to a precedent of the United States attacking Iran in June 2025 and last February, while Iranian and U.S. negotiators were in the middle of nuclear negotiations mediated by Oman. While the provisions of Iran's counter-proposal to the U.S. 15-point plan have not been officially disclosed, Tehran has reportedly laid out its demands on how to end the war, including a cessation of hostilities in all fronts across the region, a protocol for safe transit through the Strait of Hormuz, and war damage compensation. According to the semi-official Mehr news agency, Tehran's other conditions include accepting Iran's right to uranium enrichment, lifting of all primary and secondary U.S. economic sanctions, termination of all UN Security Council nuclear resolutions against Iran, and termination of all resolutions of International Atomic Energy Agency. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire after ramping up his threats for several weeks until they reached an alarming level of the menace of attacking Iran's civilian infrastructure, including power plants and bridges, on Tuesday. Turaj Shirililo from Tehran for A News.
So where does this all go next? Well, talks are expected in Islamabad, but the real question is whether this moment can actually hold, given the deep mistrust between Washington and Tehran. Well, joining me now is Gonzalo Teles, speaking to us from Lisbon in Portugal. Gonzalo, always great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. What's your instinct then from what you've seen? Is this pause really precarious, or do you think both sides have fundamentally decided to move on?
Thanks for having me, Guy. Always a pleasure. Yeah, to be honest, I think that it's a pause, and a pause that we have to understand that may fall here, especially concerning recent developments. I mean, Iran is already blocking the Strait of Hormuz. These are the latest developments due to the Israeli attack of Lebanon. So I would be very cautious here on how long the ceasefire will stand and the meaning of it. I mean, looking into the 10-point plan, we see that there is clearly an Iran that is reinforced in all aspects. I mean, when you look at what the situation was before the Israeli and the US attack on Iran, and what was Iran's positioning and what is Iran's positioning now, and there's a total reinforcement of that happening. The control of the Strait of Hormuz, which did not happening, and now they're actually putting a toll on it. So Donald Trump agreeing to a toll here of millions, of, considering each ship that passes on the strait, is an enormous game changer here for Iran, besides all the rest. So I would put a very cautious diplomatic question mark here on how long this ceasefire will last, if it will actually last the 2 weeks, and on the talks in all aspects.
Yeah, it's very interesting, as you say. There are many, underneath the rhetoric, there are signs, aren't there, of an emboldened Iran, an Iran that has come together under a new leader, in many ways confounding some of the objectives that the US had. But nevertheless, Iran has indicated that it is willing to have direct talks with the US. Do you think that will happen? And what should we read into that?
I think it will happen. I mean, and Pakistan definitely played a key role here, and it's important. It's important to state that the ceasefire was fundamental. I mean, I don't think anybody woke up today not happy with the ceasefire. The whole question is, will it be sustained? And what is the essential word here and the essential sentiment for a ceasefire or a peace plan to develop beyond the ceasefire? It's trust. And what we know now is that there's no trust between the regime of Iran and between the US administration. And that was because of all this process. I mean, when Donald Trump speaks about regime change, there is no regime change in Iran. We know that the leaders that were killed and that are in Iran today, they're exactly the same or only worse, as extremist as the regime before. So that was not a victory that he can claim in the US. He can't claim any victory whatsoever. This was probably one of the biggest strategic outfalls of the U.S. history, if not actually the biggest of all. So it's very difficult for us to imagine a diplomatic ceasefire in the long term and peace talks in the long term, with the American administration being humiliated at this point, because what we're talking about is actually an American humiliation in all aspects. And even Netanyahu, when you look at Netanyahu, and we know now today that Donald Trump went into this war because of the Prime Minister of Israel, because of Netanyahu, and he actually agreed to this ceasefire, contradicting Netanyahu, and probably Netanyahu did not like this ceasefire. And what he's doing in Lebanon is actually an answer to that. So we have here, in my perspective, and I have to be cautious with the words, but there's no other way to put it, two madmen that are leading here the West in a completely outrageous attack and war, and it's difficult to frame them even in diplomatic stance, because how can Donald Trump sell this internally? It's very difficult to see how he can sell this internally in any aspect.
I mean, one actor in this that is claiming a victory and has had a significant win is, as you say, Pakistan. What does that tell us, what they've been able to achieve here? What does that tell us about the role of Islamabad in the region right now?
It tells us that it's in a good light, that it comes from a regional actor into a global actor as a mediator here. But also, I think that China's role here was very important for Pakistan to be this mediator, because in obvious reasons, China could not play a role as a mediator here. And it kind of, we know now through various intelligence sources that China didn't want this to spread into a regional battlefield, and that would have been the worst for China. So China is kind of being here a key player besides Pakistan, and kind of drawing the line in a darker light, or not in the spotlight, if you want, so that it doesn't expand in a regional sense, and that's very important for China. But again, Pakistan obviously has a win here as a meditator also.
And we've heard Donald Trump talk about, as he's done before, talk about big economic potential of rebuilding in the region, these sort of grand, quite generic terms. Nevertheless, though, do you think that the economic upside, the potential of rebuilding, of putting things back together, that could help lock in a potential peace?
By the economic gains, you mean in the restructuring of Iran, of the country?
Yes, correct. So Donald Trump has been very strong on this, that actually, I think he said there's lots of money to be made for everybody. Obviously, there's a lack of trust, as you said, between both sides. But the chance to increase economic prosperity, could that help, do you think, make sure that the peace doesn't break?
That's a good question. I don't know. With all honesty, I think it's difficult to see that future because I mean, again, we have to go back at what the reality was before this attack, and the reality was before this attack that there was no problem with the Strait of Hormuz. All intelligence concerning the nuclear program said that Iran was no way near to a bomb or to anything near to that. And now what we have in the Strait of Hormuz is an Iran that is putting a toll on ships that pass and putting a very high toll financially. And what Donald Trump says to this is, we're working on a joint venture between the US and Iran so we can make some money out of this. Again, this is not serious political talk. This is not serious diplomatically. This is very irrational because this wouldn't work both for the US regionally, because Donald Trump obviously doesn't want to understand that the US's position in the region is very fragile today. He made it very fragile, not only globally, but also regionally, it's very fragile. So even in a business perspective, that he always likes to bring this business perspective in his biggest outcomes, I don't see that happening. It's the same way with the tariffs. He said that the tariffs would be something great for the U.S. financially, economically. That is not the reality. The U.S. is losing ground, even economically, with the tariffs. You could look at it in various aspects. And what is happening is that the world is turning to other players. They're understanding, again, the last time I was on the show, I spoke about this, and Pedro Sanchez, the prime minister's understanding of this war and how he was looking at it in the 360 perspective. No need to say that this was right in all aspects. So the world is understanding, and each country is understanding in different geographies that they can look at other players, that they don't need the US in that aspect. And if he looks at this in a transactional way, in a business way, he'll continue losing, even economically, because that's what's happening with his tariffs. So when he speaks about a joint venture between the U.S. and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, so that ships can pay a price, which Iran is also doing, which Iran is doing now. I just think that it's again an irrational president, completely delusional, completely out of touch with what is real politics. With what is the history of the US, what is the history of US diplomacy. Europe understands this now. It understood it too late, but the world needs to see the US president through what he is. At the moment, he's a Muppet of Netanyahu. He was a Muppet of Netanyahu to go into this attack, and he's lost all credibility globally, and he's probably going to lose all credibility locally in the US if the American people are still sane and see things through what they are.
I mean, he is nevertheless going to be US president for at least a couple more years, Gonzalo. Given what you know about all the actors involved in this.
I'm predicting, sorry, I just interrupt you.
Of course, yeah.
I'm predicting a very strong loss of the Republican Party in November. Obviously, he'll stay after that. But I think that if he does something like this again, it won't, I don't know how it will work in terms of impeachment or not. But again, what I think that happened last night was that it wasn't Donald Trump taking over. Because when you look at this 10-point plan of Iran, and you see a reinforced Iran, and you see what Donald Trump said a week ago, and this is way, way distant from what he wanted, and this is completely agreeing towards a fragility like we've never seen of the U.S. in a country like Iran. And after an attack. So I would say that obviously we're dealing with a US president that is going to last 2 more years. But under what terms, I honestly don't know. Because I'm predicting, hopefully, the worst for the Republican Party in November if it continues to be blind on a Trump administration and with no control over it. And I'm predicting.
Gonzalo, sorry to butt in there. I mean, that's your political prediction. I'd also like, if I could, to get your prediction about this situation overall. So given that we know that he will be president, given that we've learnt quite a lot about both actors and other actors involved over the course of this conflict, what do you think is the best we can hope for over the coming months ahead?
I think that the best that we can hope for in the region is definitely that going to the place where we were before this attack, is that the Strait of Hormuz is completely free of any tolls whatsoever, of any obstructions, and that would be the best for the global economy, for the world, from the world as a whole, even for the US, for Europe, for all regions. But I am not very optimistic on that, again, because I think that the Iran regime, which is exactly the same as it was yesterday, found here in the Strait of Hormuz a great weapon that can paralyze the world. When we know that 20% of the oil and gas comes from there, Asian countries are completely influenced by the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's very hard to go where we were before this attack, and that's my best provision or most optimistic provision, is for us to go where we were before this attack. But I'm sorry to say that this probably won't happen after this attack.
Gonzalo, we always appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at growing Azerbaijan-Kazakhstan ties. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Now, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev welcomed Kazakhstan's Foreign Minister and Transport Minister on Wednesday. Now, they discussed strengthening bilateral ties, maximising the joint investment fund and exploring joint projects in third countries. Key initiatives highlighted include the Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian and Green Energy Corridor, and a fibre optic line, underlining the continued cooperation between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. Well, let's turn now to a key regional meeting that's drawing attention here in Baku. Joining me in the studio is A News's Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amishov. Orkan, as always, great to see you. Very, very interesting, this development, isn't it? The heightened regional tension is palpable. How significant, then, is this meeting between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan at this point?
In particular, bearing in mind what's happening to the south in Iran, with the two-week conditional ceasefire being declared, it's vital that these two countries coordinate their efforts in relation to all regional crises happening all around the world. Interestingly enough, on the 5th of March, when Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan airport was targeted in an Iranian drone attack, one of the country's officials of a country which contacted Azerbaijani officials was Kazakhstan. There was actually C6 meeting, sort of call involving those countries, and that was about a coordinated response to the crisis happening in and around Iran. Well, these two countries are not technically treaty allies. They are strategic partners, and they got allied interaction. There's a difference between having allied interaction and being actually treated allies. Interestingly enough, these two countries signed a couple of documents underpinning their current relationship back in 2004, 2005, and Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan triangle is widely described as the essence of the, not just Middle Corridor geography, but also essence of the Turkic world. Without that triangle, it would be very difficult to put forward all of those initiatives and achieve all of those projects. Regarding this particular meeting, timing is very interesting. I don't necessarily think it was ad hoc meeting, sort of pre-planned. I think it was planned a few weeks ago. there are different dimensions. President Aliyev received foreign minister and transport minister, so you can actually infer from those people, from the ranks of those people, that the meeting concentrated on foreign policy matters and also connectivity, transport related matters. Trade turnover between the two countries is not really gargantuan. It's about $1 billion US dollars. It does not really reflect the intensity and potentiality of the interaction between the two countries, because when you have this transit connectivity-based relations, the considerable part of the relationship is not about trade turnover per se, about imports and exports, but also about the transit-based relationship. I mean, for Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan plays an important role in terms of diversifying its oil and gas exports, in particular oil, of course. Gas is more problematic. Mostly Kazakhstani gas is bound to China and largely to Russia. But when it comes to oil, I think 5% of Kazakh crude oil actually is being transported across the Caspian via tankers and across Azerbaijan westwards. So Azerbaijan plays an important role, because for Kazakhstan to be more self-sufficient and to be able to properly fulfill what is fashionable to call this stage geopolitical balancing act, it's vital to limit Chinese and Russian influence, and Azerbaijan provide that access to European markets, which is at the very heart of Kazakhstan's geopolitical balancing act. Because you imagine Kazakhstan is a massive country. It's about probably 20 million population.
Ninth biggest country in the world.
Yes, indeed, in terms of its territory. If memory serves me correctly, 2.7 million square kilometers. It's a massive, massive territory, of course. But the size of the economy in terms of pure GDP is not commensurate with that massive geographical size that you're seeing here. But still, it's very important. It's effectively connecting China, which is the world's second biggest economy, with the Caspian Sea. So if you, in the context of Middle Corridor geography, if you take Uzbekistan out of the equation, Middle Corridor will still exist. Uzbekistan is a landlocked country, of course. It's very important. It's got a huge population, 35, 40 million population. But really, in terms of its geographical position, the disadvantages of not having access to oceans, basically, is one of its fundamental problems. Caspian Sea is not connected with the oceans, and Azerbaijan is a landlocked country as well, but still Uzbekistan is double landlocked country. And in this particular case, if you take Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan out of the equation, there will be no Middle Corridor. So basically, back to the original point, timing is very interesting, but these two countries have got this allied interaction, and they've got this Supreme Interstate Council, wherein they are building up the elements of a larger puzzle, and that larger puzzle revolves around the Middle Corridor geography. A lot is to be done in terms of synchronizing railway systems, building this very comprehensive multimodal connectivity system. I mean, let me just give you one example. For example, a couple of days ago, before President Aliyev visited Georgia, a number of members from Turkmenistan were in Azerbaijan. They met Azerbaijani president, and then the self-same people went to Georgia, met Georgian president. So you can actually understand that there is a Middle Corridor sort of activities all around the world. So this delegation being received by President Aliyev just one day after President Aliyev's state visit Georgia, and with the transport minister being there, tells you in the clearest possible way it's all about connectivity. And connectivity is essential, because if you want to connect China with Turkey, avoiding Iran and Russia, you're going to go through Kazakhstan, across Caspian, Azerbaijan, and that's the essence of the matter.
All about connectivity, as you say, Orkan. Given what's been going on in the world and not far from here recently, as things now settle down and we look towards a more peaceful future, particularly between the US and Iran, how important does that Middle Corridor start to become? And what is the potential, do you think, for the Middle Corridor? We talk about it a lot. Where could it go?
Well, Middle Corridor is no longer sort of a peripheral auxiliary transit route, which are there to be added to the wider scheme as additional elements to northern route, which is absolutely essential, and also southern route. Middle Corridor is indispensable and secure. Iran will remain a source of vexation and geopolitical turbulence for the years to come. I mean, this 2-week ceasefire may bring in degree of sort of a calm and tranquility in the midst of geopolitical angst, but largely for this system present there in Tehran, Iran's relation with the neighboring countries and with the United States will not change in a very meaningfully dramatic way. Russia-Ukraine war is still underway. and that's not going to be sorted out anytime soon, as we understand. So Northern Route is not functioning properly. There are limitations and sanctions imposed on Russia. Basically, what we have here, in view of ongoing crises involving Iran and Russia, Ukraine, this route is only a stable route. Because if you want to get from China to Turkey, you're going to go through Central Asian territory. The problem here, of course, naturally, it's a multimodal. The multimodal nature of the middle corridor can be described as both advantage but also disadvantage, because it's very time consuming.
Yes.
You need to build infrastructure, and infrastructure is not there. I mean, had Iran had good relations with the Western world, and had Iran had that necessary infrastructure connecting China with Turkey and Europe, probably importance of middle corridor would not have been there. It would have still been very important, of course, because you always need to have options available to you, but not really that important as it is at present. And Russia-Ukraine war, we have already discussed, it's not going to sort out itself anytime soon. And from the Kazakhstan's point of view, now they are actually exporting 80% of their crude oil to Russia, basically, and from Russia before it used to go to Europe as well. So basically Kazakhstan is constrained by virtue of its geography, and Caspian Sea should become a sea of connection rather than sea of division. Potentiality there, and therefore investment should be made. For example, one of the massive challenges in terms of building Trans-Caspian pipeline is a requirement of money. You need to invest heavily, and Americans were involved at the beginning, and now this pipeline is still being discussed, but naturally there are massive problems. Let me add one more point in terms of sort of essential nature of this corridor, because we're talking about gas pipelines, oil pipelines, we talk about cargo and so forth, but also there's a digital realm. Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are presently building a digital silkway infrastructure across the Caspian Sea, through the seabed of the Caspian, and it's essential for them for the purpose of digital connectivity, because from the purpose of digital connection, those optic lines go through Kazakhstan to Russia and then to Azerbaijan. So when you're heavily reliant on Russia for digital connectivity, you're losing a degree of sovereignty. So in that connection between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, we see the foundational element which will make these two countries more self-sufficient, less reliant on other actors, and become part of one unit. And Organization of Turkish States, of course, and Middle Corridor Geography are the two vehicles providing that element.
And Orkan, one of the things that Kazakhstan is looking to do is to diversify its export routes.
Yeah.
What's driving that, do you think? Is that to do with instability, or is it more nuanced than that?
It's more nuanced, of course. I mean, having different options and having diversified channels for the purpose of exporting your raw materials or energy resources gives your country a degree of self-sufficiency and autonomy, sort of strategic autonomy. Kazakhstan, during 1990s, was heavily reliant on Russia, on Russian markets. So basically, when you're reliant on Russian markets, you're not able to negotiate prices better, because you know that your market is over there, you don't have different options, and there's no major competition. Interestingly enough, despite its vast proven gas reserves, because those gas reserves are not easily extractable, they currently actually heavily reliant on Chinese technology as well, and also Russian markets. This is something which is limiting Kazakhstan's quest for strategic autonomy. And the relations with Azerbaijan in the context of energy relationship gives Kazakhstan that extra leverage. But Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan are also two biggest economies in their respective regions. And apart from that, there are separate bilateral and trilateral formats involving Central Asian countries. And what Kazakhstan is trying to do, it's fully conscious of its centrality to the Central Asian dimension. It's also fully conscious that on its own, it wouldn't be able to compete with China and Russia, not just because of its size, but also because it's dexterity of that is not present there. But that dexterity, from the Kazakh point of view, could be attained by means of geopolitical balancing act. Azerbaijan plays an important role in that. Also having trilateral and quadrilateral format relationship modes with Central Asian countries. One of these sort of formats evolved over the past couple of years with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, and that's absolutely essential. That entails digital connectivity and also energy prospects, because Uzbekistan is incredibly rich in terms of its GDP, in terms of its strengths, but it needs to be brought into a wider connectivity agenda, and that's what Kazakhstan is doing, and doing it in an admirable fashion.
How tough will that be to do, Orkan? Because there are many different elements there, aren't there? Do you envisage a time when Uzbekistan will form a more integrated component?
Well, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are treaty allies, and basically that provides for Uzbekistan a degree of economic security and also deeper alignment with Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan is probably the rising star of Central Asia in terms of its population, in terms of its energy, in terms of its intellectual resources, and in terms of its leadership within the Organization of Turkish States. Uzbekistan's got immense potentiality, and by means of having closer relationship with Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, this triangle of countries could actually form the crux of what will become a Turkic world. Without this triangle, we can't imagine the future of Turkic world. Turkmenistan is slightly behind these three countries due to its fundamental international policy imperatives. They cannot have allied interaction with anybody because they are the internationally neutral country, and that status was adopted back in 1995. So that will allow Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Central Asia lead the process of integration. And these two countries, in particular, I talk about Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they fully understand that United States of America, in order to limit Central Asia, limit China in Central Asia and Russia to a certain extent, is going to invest heavily in this territory. The Kazakhstan's rare earth mineral resource are incredibly important for U.S. economy, and also, of course, with Central Asia 5 becoming effectively Central Asia 6 with Azerbaijan, U.S. foreign policy objectives regarding this region is becoming more unified. So,
where are the limits to that, Orkan? Because I think many people have discussed whether it's the OTS, whether it's this sort of greater integration connectivity across Central Asia. When it comes to those states that we can see here, that collaboration across the Turkic world, people have spoken about this becoming the new EU. How far should we get carried away with this, or how far could this go over the next sort of 2 to 5 years?
I don't think it's a good idea to get carried away with anything related to integration and harmonization. Something similar to what happened in the context of EU is happening here as well, but it's different. I discussed this with a number of people who specialize in this particular field. With EU, it was a bit different. It was the number of countries after 1945 coming together, building a common market, setting the rules, basically, common rules for that market to function. In this particular case, something else is happening. These countries, basically, I talk about 6 countries here, probably Central Asia 5+1, or we can actually look at it from the perspective of Organization of Turkish States, where we don't have Tajikistan, which is a member of 5 Central Asian countries. We see the separate strategic initiatives emerging. For example, let's say Green Initiative involving Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. It's about green energy being transported across Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan and then to Turkey. It's a strategic initiative. On the basis of that initiative, you build a connectivity agenda, and that agenda involves, of course, naturally, the harmonization of different transport routes, the multimodal transport routes. When you build that strategic initiative, what happens? You need to regulate it properly. When you regulate it, of course, you create something common. So it's not about setting rules first and then creating infrastructure, but the creating infrastructure and then on the basis of existing infrastructure, creating, or rather generating by means of existing infrastructure, a necessity of creating rules. So it's not rules first, infrastructure next, but infrastructure first. And when you have infrastructure, that infrastructure should function. And then, of course, there's a genuine necessity for creating rules. So effectively, what we observe here, that goes to the very essence of Turkic integration and Turkic unification, and this goes to the very heart of Organization of Turkish States. So bilateral, trilateral strategic initiatives, which along the lines that I explained, and then those initiatives are integrating themselves and becoming the Turkic world. That is the way from bilateral, trilateral strategic initiatives, we have these initiatives emerging into coalescing into one system, and that becoming common market in the fullness of time.
Gathering its own momentum. Orkan, always great to have you with us in the studio.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, oil prices dived, global markets rallied after the news of a Iran-US ceasefire. However, the US president announced a new tariff, so let's get straight to it. Donald Trump threatened tariffs of 50% on countries supplying weapons to Iran. The announcement came just after the United States and Iran agreed a 2-week truce.
The US will impose tariffs of 50% on any and all goods imported to the country from any nation supplying military weapons to Iran, US President Donald Trump said on Wednesday. In a Truth Social post, the US president wrote that any country found to be supplying Iran with weapons would be subject to the levy immediately, with no exclusions or exemptions. It came as Trump said the US would work closely with Iranian authorities following the ceasefire agreement announced on Tuesday and what Trump called very productive regime change. Trump said in a separate post that there will be no enrichment of uranium and that the US and Iran will discuss tariffs and sanctions relief.
The news of a ceasefire in the Middle East sent oil prices plunging by some 15% to below $100 per barrel. Meanwhile, U.S. future stocks were on the rise.
U.S. stock futures jumped Wednesday after U.S. President Donald Trump said he was suspending Iran attacks for 2 weeks, just ahead of his 8 p.m. Eastern Time deadline, pausing a 5-week conflict that closed a crucial waterway for global energy supply and sent equity prices reeling. Futures tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by 1,229 points, or 2.6%, by 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time. S&P 500 futures added 2.7%, and Nasdaq 100 futures climbed 3.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude futures tumbled more than 16% to $94.4 a barrel following Trump's declaration, while international benchmark Brent for June delivery lost more than 14% to $93.6 per barrel. Trump said the 2-week ceasefire was subject to Iran agreeing to a complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The US has received a 10-point proposal from Iran that is a workable basis for negotiations, he said. Iran's Supreme National Security Council has agreed to reopen the waterway for 2 weeks, as long as all attacks are halted, according to a statement from Iran's foreign minister. The statement said transit would need to be coordinated with Iran's armed forces.
The relief across global markets was also felt in Europe, where the leading share index was on track for its best day in 4 years. The continent's fear gauge fell to its lowest level in 3 weeks.
European shares jumped more than 3% on Wednesday as a 2-week Middle East ceasefire sparked a relief rally across global markets, raising hopes that oil and gas flows through the Strait of Hormuz could soon resume. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 index was up 3.6% at 611 points as of 8:34 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Regional markets also mirrored the move, with Germany's DAX up 4.7%, while London's FTSE 100 climbed 2.5%. Europe's fear gauge, the Stoxx Volatility Index, fell below 25 for the first time in 3 weeks. The gains on Wednesday were broad-based, with travel, industrials and banking advancing between 6% and 7%. They are typically seen as prime beneficiaries of lower energy costs and falling bond yields.
Asian stocks were also mostly on the rise, with the major indexes gaining up to 7% in Wednesday trading following the announcement of the US-Iran truce.
Asian markets rallied on Wednesday as the US-Iran ceasefire agreement drove crude oil prices sharply lower, eased concerns of an economic slowdown, and lifted investors' appetite for risk. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 index rose 5.3% to 56,308 points, climbing for a 4th straight day to hit its highest close since March 2nd. The yield on the benchmark Japanese government bond fell 4 basis points after hitting a 27-year high on Tuesday. South Korean shares rose nearly 7% on Wednesday to close at the highest level since mid-March, as the two-week US-Iran ceasefire sparked a relief rally. The benchmark Kospi closed up 6.8% at 5,872 points. In Hong Kong, the benchmark Hang Seng Index finished at 25,893 points, gaining 3%.
Still in Asia, shares of South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix surged by up to 15% after peer Samsung Electronics forecast market-beating quarterly earnings, fueling expectations about SK Hynix's results.
SK Hynix shares surged on Wednesday. Investors bought in after its fellow South Korean chipmaker Samsung forecast a big quarterly earnings jump. It led markets to question whether SK Hynix might be on course for something similar. Samsung on Tuesday projected its first quarter operating profit would rise more than eightfold. That was well ahead of analyst estimates. Samsung found demand for AI infrastructure stretched supply and drove chip prices higher. Korea Investment and Securities on Wednesday raised its estimate for SK Hynix's full-year operating profit. It now sees a 28% climb to just over $146.5 billion, more than quadruple last year's numbers. That was due to stronger than expected price increases of both DRAM and NAND chips. SK Hynix shares traded up 15% each at one point, which outperformed Samsung's more than 8% gain. SK Hynix is due to report January to March earnings later this month.
And finally, in aviation industry news, Delta Airlines scrapped growth plans, citing jet fuel price surge from the Iran war. However, following the ceasefire, Delta's shares were on the rise, as were the shares of its competitors.
Delta Airlines on Wednesday forecast lower than expected profit for the second quarter and said it was too early to update its full-year outlook, citing uncertainty from a surge in jet fuel prices driven by the Iran war. The Atlanta-based airline said it was removing all planned capacity growth from the June quarter, which would cut supply by about 3.5 percentage points from its original plan. Delta added its capacity growth plans now have a downward bias until the fuel environment improves. The US carrier's forecast highlights the growing strain fuel costs are placing on airlines after the Middle East conflict sent shockwaves through energy markets. Since late February, jet fuel prices have nearly doubled, marking the industry's first major post-pandemic stress test by inflating costs, disrupting schedules, and pushing the limits of what travelers will pay. However, there were some signs of relief on Tuesday after US President Donald Trump said a two-week ceasefire agreement had been reached with Iran. Delta shares extended gains to rise about 12% in pre-market trading after the airline reported stronger than expected first quarter profit. Shares of rival carriers also rose before the bell. United Airlines was up 14%, American Airlines added 12%, and Southwest Airlines gained 11%.
And that's all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll be looking at UK's Keir Starmer's Gulf diplomacy push. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Now, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in Saudi Arabia meeting Gulf allies to push diplomatic efforts around the agreement. Now, he's welcomed the ceasefire as a moment of relief, but made clear that this is only a first step, with much more needed to secure a lasting peace.
Well, we've just reached this ceasefire, which is both welcome and I think there'll be a sense of real relief. There certainly is across the region and for the United Kingdom. But there's work to do, and I'm here in Saudi Arabia and neighbouring countries now to carry out that work in support of what we're all seeking, which is that this ceasefire should be not a temporary ceasefire, but a permanent ceasefire. On top of that, we have to acknowledge that this war wasn't our war, but my job is to protect the UK. It's already had an impact on the UK, and it's very important that we get the Strait of Hormuz open. There's a lot of work to do there. We've been convening a number of countries. I now get the opportunity here in Saudi Arabia and countries nearby in the region to have the discussions, to coordinate our actions, and to go forward collectively in pursuit of those two missions.
Okay, joining us now is A News' Katie Wilson. Katie, great to have you with us as always. Just bring us up to speed then. Where is Keir Starmer right now and who's he been meeting?
So just a few hours ago he landed in Saudi Arabia and is visiting Gulf allies to push for a longer-term resolution to the Iran conflict. So this visit was actually planned before the ceasefire announcement, so we'd likely see Starmer aiming to shore up support for that agreement. He'll be holding meetings with Gulf partners and regional leaders, although Downing Street is yet to say exactly who that's going to be. We heard him there just say neighbouring countries, so we can hazard a few guesses, but we don't know for sure just yet. And Number 10 has said that the focus will be on practical efforts to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to be a big topic. And he'll also meet with Royal Air Force crews protecting Allied airspace before addressing troops. So we've got this sort of twofold focus on these talks. We've got reinforcing that ceasefire and trying to turn it into something more long term. And secondly, working with allies on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which that is the critical global shipping route for oil and gas, which obviously has been a key battleground in this war. And this ceasefire comes after President Trump threatened a whole civilization will die if Iran didn't agree to end the war and unblock the Strait of Hormuz. So that led to Downing Street to call for de-escalation. So it'll be interesting how Starmer navigates that in the wake of, such a surprising outburst from Trump.
Yeah, because one of the criticisms that Keir Starmer's faced, Katie, is that he was slow to act, didn't really commit to one side or another. And that criticism was amplified by Donald Trump, who was saying, look, Keir, you don't need your team to tell you what to do, you can decide. And now the fighting's over, critics are saying, well, he's just coming in for the photo op. I mean, what is the official role that the UK has?
It's interesting you say that, as opposition parties in the UK has been saying the same thing today. The Tory party and Reform have been saying, why is he going? And, what is the point of this? And they've questioned whether that relationship between the UK and the US has been damaged as a result of those swipes that Trump has taken at Starmer. But in terms of public opinion, I think generally the public was supportive of Starmer's stance and that he wasn't giving in to Trump, and he was saying the Labour Party has learned the lessons from Iraq. So I think actually, even though Trump and the opposition is saying one thing, public opinion is actually probably supportive of Starmer, which is surprising, as Starmer hasn't been the most popular Prime Minister, it's fair to say. So yeah, in terms of the main focus of this visit, Downing Street says the central focus will be diplomatic, essentially trying to lock in and build on that fragile ceasefire. And Number 10 has been clear the priority is to support and sustain the ceasefire and turn it into something longer term. And obviously there is that practical objective there, which is restoring the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, and that is critical for not only the UK economy but the wider economy and global energy supplies. And as I mentioned, Trump has been publicly expressing anger at Starmer over that cautious, diplomacy-led approach towards opening the Strait of Hormuz, especially compared with what Trump wanted, which was a more hardline military stance. But more broadly, this is about protecting the UK's interests and the global economy, which has, of course, been under massive pressure due to disruption from this conflict. Yeah,
it's very interesting what you say there. Despite the criticism, it's actually played quite well for Starmer domestically. Katie, what about the role in terms of defence that the UK has played and is playing now? We heard all sorts of stories. We heard about the warship that seemed to be taking its time to get down to the region. Where is the UK at the moment when it comes to defence in the region?
Yes, so it's quite a multi-layered approach that the UK has been taken, but the Downing Street is stressing at every stage of this that everything is defensive that the UK has been deploying. So it's a mix of air, naval and ground-based systems. As you mentioned, on the naval side, the Royal Navy deployed the HMS Dragon, so that's a destroyer equipped with advanced missile defence systems to the Eastern Mediterranean to help protect UK bases. So we've got bases in Cyprus and allies from drone and missile threats. And as you mentioned, that took longer than some of Starmer's critics would have liked, and they said it took too long for Starmer to deploy. It took almost a week for Starmer to deploy. In the air, the UK has reinforced its presence with additional Typhoon fighter jets in Qatar, alongside existing aircraft already carrying out what the Ministry of Defence calls defensive air operations across the region. And there's also been a focus on countering drone attacks. Britain has deployed Wildcat helicopters with anti-drone missiles to Cyprus, following strikes near the RAF bases there. But it is all in all quite a calibrated, cautious approach that we're seeing from the UK. They're very much protective measures rather than offensive operations. So I think it's a balance that Starmer is trying to achieve here, where he wants to demonstrate the UK is serious about defending its personnel, its allies, and sending that reassuring signal to Gulf partners. But on the other hand, it's cautious, again, especially compared to that rhetoric coming out of Washington, where Trump has been pushing for a more assertive military presence from allies.
So beyond just opening up the Strait of Hormuz and keeping it open, what have officials been saying about broader objectives?
Well, there has been a statement from not only Sir Keir Starmer, but 8 other countries in calling for quick progress towards a negotiated settlement on the Iran conflict. So that statement came out today, and it was issued and signed by the leaders of the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, Spain, Japan, and the presidents of the European Commission and the European Council. And it followed that announcement from the US of a 2-week ceasefire overnight. Now, just some lines from that statement. They say, "We strongly encourage quick progress towards a substantive negotiated settlement. This will be crucial to protect the civilian population of Iran and ensure security in the region, and it can avert a severe global energy crisis," which of course is crucial for all of these economies. They say we're in close contact with the United States and other partners, and they're also calling upon all sides to implement the ceasefire, including in Lebanon. If you remember, Israel was made it very clear that this didn't include Lebanon, and they're continuing to bomb the country today. And they say in this statement again, "Our governments will contribute to ensuring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz." And we've heard a bit more from the UK Foreign Secretary as well as a result of this statement, and she welcomes the ceasefire between the US and Iran, but again is calling for the fighting in Lebanon to now end as well. And Yvette Cooper is very much viewing this as a first step, as the US and Iran have scheduled talks for later in the week. So it's fair to say that this is early days, and it's still very much a fragile agreement.
Okay, a lot's happened, early days as you say. What about any confirmed next steps, Katie? What do we know?
So, as I mentioned, since he's arrived, it hasn't been confirmed who exactly he'll meet. We're still kind of waiting for that. We heard neighbouring countries earlier on, we've heard Gulf allies. So, if we were to hazard a guess about who that might be, it could be Saudi Arabia, obviously where he's landed, for the UK's longer-term military partner there, the UAE, potentially also Qatar, which hosts British forces. So, as we saw earlier, Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to the media following his arrival, and just to bring you some lines from that, so he said there's still a lot of work to do to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and says it's early days. But he did say there was a real sense of relief following the agreement announced by President Trump last night. And it sounds like Starmer has also visited a military base after his arrival, and he says people at that military base, as well as in the UK, will want this relief to be permanent. Now, one interesting thing is, one thing that Reform leader Nigel Farage was talking about was Starmer's relationship with Trump, and whether that's been damaged as a result of Starmer's quite defiant response to Trump's criticism. And Starmer refused to be drawn in on whether that relationship has been damaged by the conflict. Earlier, Starmer was on good terms with the president. It's fair to say Trump had a historic second state visit to the UK, but Trump and his administration has repeatedly lashed out at the UK and others for not joining in with attacks on Iran. And he also took quite personal swipes at Starmer, saying he was no Winston Churchill. So speaking from Saudi Arabia, Sir Keir said, "I've acted as you would expect of a British Prime Minister, which is being absolutely focused on what is our national interest." He says that's the right position for the United Kingdom, and that included taking action but collective self-defence. He says the principles of not getting dragged into this war, principles of always seeing the UK will act on a lawful simple basis and only for the viable long-term plan, potentially wanting to demonstrate those lessons from Iraq there. He says they're the right principles. As I say, I'm the British Prime Minister. I act in the British national interest and nothing is going to deflect me from that. So quite defiant words again from Starmer. So it'll be interesting to see how this visit plays out across the Gulf.
It certainly will. Katie, we thank you very much indeed, as always. Thank you. OK, after the break, we'll take a look at growing pressure on civilians in Lebanon. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. In Lebanon, civilians say they are exhausted as violence continues, with uncertainty over whether the latest ceasefire will include the country or leave it exposed once again.
Lebanese residents say they are exhausted by ongoing violence as uncertainty surrounds a US-Iran ceasefire and whether Lebanon will be included.
The clear message is that Israel does not want to stop. It seeks to continue the fighting to exert pressure across the region. Where does this lead? More conflict and more destruction. In any scenario, Lebanon should be excluded. Iran will not abandon Lebanon. As you know, Hezbollah is one of its key pillars. That is why I believe there will be significant pressure on Netanyahu to acknowledge that Lebanon is outside the conflict.
Residents in Beirut's southern suburbs say the country cannot endure further escalation.
Now Netanyahu has excluded Lebanon. There will be pressure on him, and hopefully a ceasefire will happen, because Lebanon can't take it anymore. Everything is collapsing.
Others reflect on decades of instability and hope any deal could bring a broader settlement.
I was born in 1976. Since I was born until now, not a single day has passed without war. My children are going through the same thing until now. Will it continue like this? Or will we end it, make peace, and end it? God knows. But I think there might be another agreement that includes Hezbollah in this agreement, with peace between us and Israel. That's what I believe.
Some also believe Iran will continue to back Lebanon, despite uncertainty over the ceasefire terms.
The Iranians won't let us down. They never let us down.
The Israeli military says operations against Hezbollah are continuing, while sources close to the group say it has paused fire as part of the US-Iran ceasefire.
We're going to take a look at what is happening around the world with our correspondents. They're going to be telling us all about the latest happenings in each of those regions. And we're going to start with Turkey. Now, Turkey is setting out an ambitious new target for defence exports, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan signalling a major push to strengthen the country's position in the global market in the years ahead. Here are the details.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Tuesday that Turkey hopes to be among the world's top 10 exporters of defense technology within the coming 2 years. Erdogan was speaking at the inauguration of a new missile production facility operated by Turkish defense firm Roketsan. According to the Turkish leader, Ankara has set an $11 billion target for defense and aerospace exports by the year 2028. Turkish defense exports have grown significantly in recent years, supported by stepped-up investments in the domestic technology field. Speaking to reporters, Erdogan noted that defense technology exports had risen from $248 million in 2002 to more than $10 billion last year. In the first quarter of 2026, he said, the country's total defense and aerospace exports rose by 12% year-on-year to more than $1.9 billion. Within the past decade, Turkey has emerged as a major exporter of high-tech defense systems, including unmanned aerial vehicles, naval platforms, and electronic warfare technologies. Turkish-built drones, particularly the Bayraktar TB2, gained international attention after playing a significant role in Azerbaijan's military victory over Armenia in 2020. In a related development, Roketsan CEO Murat Ikinci on Tuesday announced a $3 billion infrastructure expansion plan. The initiative aims to boost domestic missile production and strengthen space launch capabilities. According to Akinci, the company recently completed the first $1 billion phase of the project, which includes a $450 million fuel production facility in the Turkish city of Kırıkkale. Officials say the new infrastructure is expected to significantly increase Turkey's missile fuel output and support future space and defense programs. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Georgia is considering a new state-backed lender to support key sectors, but the IMF is warning that without strong safeguards, the risks could outweigh the benefits. A News' correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports.
The International Monetary Fund has issued a cautious warning as Georgia considers establishing a development bank, a state-backed institution designed to finance projects that private banks often avoid. These typically include large infrastructure, agriculture, or small and medium-sized businesses that may be too risky or not profitable enough for commercial lenders. Unlike traditional banks, a development bank does not operate to maximize profit or compete in the retail market. It usually does not take deposits from citizens and is often funded by the state or international partners. Its main goal is to fill gaps in the economy, supporting sectors that need long-term or low-interest financing. Globally, development banks have had mixed results. Some are considered success stories. For example, Germany's KfW has played a major role in supporting small businesses and green energy projects, while Brazil's BNDES has financed large-scale industrial growth. However, there are also negative examples. In several countries, development banks have been criticized for lack of transparency, political favoritism, and funding unprofitable or politically motivated projects. In such cases, losses are often covered by taxpayers, creating long-term economic burdens. This is why the IMF is emphasizing strong governance, clear purpose, and full transparency. One key concern in Georgia's case is that the planned institution will not function as a traditional bank and may not fall under the supervision of the National Bank. This raises questions about oversight and accountability. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan are continuing, with China playing an increasingly active role in bringing the two sides closer. A News' Tamim Bahis has more.
According to Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Chinese Ambassador Zhao Xing met Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi on Tuesday, where the two sides discussed relations between Kabul and Beijing, the wider regional situation, and the ongoing talks in China. The Chinese ambassador said Beijing is working to build trust between Afghanistan and Pakistan through a neutral and cooperative approach, and expressed hope that despite the region's sensitive geopolitical situation, the process would continue with goodwill and without violence. For his part, Muttaqi thanked China for organizing and hosting the talks in Urumqi, and also acknowledged earlier mediation efforts by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and the UAE. The Afghan foreign minister further added that Kabul's position on conflict is defensive, describing the protection of Afghan territory as a legitimate right, while also reaffirming Kabul's commitment to dialogue. These latest talks come after previous mediation attempts failed to produce a breakthrough and after deadly border clashes increased tensions between the two neighbors. While reports of incidents have not completely stopped, the Urumqi negotiations have raised cautious hopes that diplomacy may still help prevent further escalation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan is moving ahead with major energy projects under a revised plan, shifting partners and pressing on with construction despite some earlier delays, in a move that signals a changing approach to how these developments are being delivered. Fariza Kalamazina picked up the story in Almaty.
Kazakhstan is moving ahead with the construction of 3 major thermal power plants without Russia's involvement. The projects located in Kokshetau, Semey and Ust-Kamenogorsk will now be carried out by a Kazakh-Singaporean consortium, according to the country's energy ministry. Officials say 2 of the plants in Semey and Ust-Kamenogorsk have already reached the key milestone, with EPC contracts signed earlier this year. In the coming months, the project is expected to enter an active phase. Key equipment deliveries are expected to begin in the third quarter of 2027, with all 3 plants scheduled to be commissioned by the end of 2029. The scale of the investment is significant. The plant in Kokshetau is estimated to cost around $750 million, while the facilities in Semey and Ust-Kamenogorsk are expected to reach roughly $850 million each. Authorities stress that the projects are being implemented without direct state budget funding. These plants were originally expected to be developed with Russia's participation. The plans date back to November 2023, when Kazakhstan's Deputy Prime Minister Serik Zhumangarin said the 2 sides intended to sign a cooperation agreement during an interregional forum. However, implementation was repeatedly delayed, with timelines and conditions revised multiple times, and Russia's role remaining uncertain. And by May 2025, Kazakhstan's first Deputy Prime Minister Roman Skляr said Moscow was facing difficulties financing equipment supplies for the plants, adding that Astana would begin looking for alternative investors if funding was not secured. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The United States and Uzbekistan are stepping up economic cooperation, launching a new platform aimed at deepening business ties and unlocking fresh investment opportunities as both sides look to build a more structured long-term partnership. A News' Seville Rajapova has the story.
The first meeting of the US-Uzbekistan Business and Investment Council has taken place in Washington, bringing together officials and business representatives from both countries. The new platform is designed to strengthen business ties and create what officials describe as a solid institutional foundation for joint investment initiatives. Following the meeting, the sides signed a memorandum of understanding outlining future cooperation. The initiative was first proposed by President Shavkat Mirziyoyev during the C5+1 summit in November 2025. A presidential decree later formalized the creation of the Council, which will coordinate major trade and investment projects and facilitate dialogue between government agencies, financial institutions, and private sector representatives. The Council is also expected to establish a dedicated investment fund, with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation serving as an anchor investor. Other international institutions, including the Asian Development Bank and the International Finance Corporation, may also join the mechanism to support projects in Uzbekistan. Among the Council's priorities are reducing trade barriers, diversifying Uzbekistan's investment portfolio, and promoting products and services from Uzbek companies, including residents of IT Park Uzbekistan in the US market. Officials say the new format reflects growing economic cooperation and aims to expand long-term partnership between the 2 countries. It is Seville Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now, on with the stories. A high-profile US visit is stirring the political waters in Hungary just days before a crucial election. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, and a bold show of American support for Hungary's Prime Minister ahead of Sunday's election. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha arrived in Budapest in a highly unusual move, openly backing Viktor Orban. Vance praised his leadership and urged Hungarians to support Orban, a rare example of a senior U.S. official effectively campaigning in a foreign election. Orban, in power for over 15 years, faces one of his toughest challenges yet, trailing opposition leader Peter Magyar by double digits as voters focus on the economy. public services, and corruption. Vance used the visit to launch a sharp attack on the EU, accusing bureaucrats in Brussels of meddling in Hungary's election and weakening its economy and energy independence. He claimed it's, quote, one of the worst examples of foreign election interference he's ever seen. Vance also aligned closely with Orbán on key geopolitical issues, from skepticism over support for Ukraine to calls for a negotiated peace, reinforcing Hungary's increasingly divergent position within the bloc. Last year, Vance rattled European leaders at the Munich Security Conference with a sharp attack on the bloc, accusing it of trying to influence election outcomes across Europe, including in Germany and Romania. At a pro-government rally in Budapest, Vance called U.S. President Trump and held up the phone, with Trump telling supporters, quote, I love Hungary and I love Viktor. He's kept your country good. The White House backing highlights a broader shift, with Washington deepening ties to nationalist and conservative movements across Europe, despite Orbán's closer relations with Russia and China. This could all be seen as a test of Hungary's direction, Europe's unity, and how much political influence the U.S. can wield within the bloc. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Oil prices have dropped sharply after a ceasefire between the United States and Iran has reopened the key global shipping route. But industry leaders warn it could take months for fuel supplies to fully recover.
Thanks for joining us this morning for...
The head of the International Air Transport Association says a full recovery in jet fuel supplies could take months, even if shipping through the Strait of Hormuz resumes.
And if it were to reopen and remain open, I think it will still take a period of months to get back to where supply needs to be, given the disruption to the refining capacity in the Middle East, which is a critical part of the global supply of refined products, and not just jet fuel, for other products as well. So it will probably take months.
Oil prices dropped sharply after the United States and Iran agreed to a conditional 2-week ceasefire, with Tehran allowing safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, a route that carries about 1/5 of global oil supply. Crude fell significantly on the announcement. Analysts say damage to refining capacity in the Middle East will slow the recovery. Airlines have been among the hardest hit, particularly in Asia, where fuel supply remains a key concern.
I think this data will help to encourage governments, or I'd like to think it will help to encourage governments to have greater energy security around a critical issue like the availability of jet, because in Asia that's the critical issue at the moment.
The ceasefire comes after weeks of escalating tensions, when Iran restricted access to the strait in response to US and Israeli strikes, pushing energy prices higher and disrupting global markets. Tehran has signalled controlled maritime transit during the 2-week pause, while stressing the truce is temporary. For now, markets have stabilised, but a full recovery will depend on whether the ceasefire holds and supply chains can fully recover.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will meet with US President Donald Trump for what he has described as a long-planned visit. Now, this comes after Trump's threat to leave the alliance following allies' detachment in the war in Iran.
US President Donald Trump is set to meet NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Wednesday in Washington. The meeting comes after Trump expressed frustration over the reluctance of European allies to assist the United States in the Middle East war, leading to his threat to withdraw from the Western military alliance. Analysts say Rutte's visit is likely aimed at keeping dialogue open and ensuring Europe does not fall completely off the administration's agenda.
I think it's important to understand that after the passage of more than a year of the second Trump administration, very few European senior policymakers, and that presumably includes the Secretary General of NATO himself, believe that it is possible to change the opinions of the president or change the policy course of this administration using rational arguments. So these visits by senior Europeans, like this one by Mark Rutte, are intended to keep dialogue open, to make sure that Europe doesn't drop completely off the map of this administration.
Trump also criticised traditional non-NATO allies, including South Korea, Australia and Japan, for not assisting in the Iran war. A NATO official said Rutte would seek to build on the outcome of last year's NATO summit in The Hague, where allies agreed to Trump's demand to increase defence spending, although experts say expectations for this visit are low.
But I expect Rutte to come here with very low expectations. What I do think he will really want to ensure is that American promises to continue selling weapons to Europe for passing on to Ukraine will be fulfilled, and that the funds paid by Europeans for those weapons will not be diverted, as media reports have suggested.
NATO, which includes European countries, the United States and Canada, was formed in 1949 to counter the risk of Soviet attack and has since been a cornerstone of Western security.
In Pakistan, a new nationwide energy saving plan introduced by the government is drawing mixed reactions from residents. Many say the changes are disrupting daily routines and hurting sales as the country takes steps to conserve power amid the Iran conflict.
Shops and markets across Pakistan began closing at 8 p.m. on Tuesday under a new nationwide energy saving plan introduced by the government. The measure, announced a day earlier, applies to major regions including Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan and Islamabad. It aims to reduce electricity use during peak hours as the country faces an ongoing energy crisis and rising fuel costs. In Lahore, markets fell quiet early, with shopkeepers shutting down and customers struggling to complete their shopping in time. Many traders said the earlier closing hours are hurting sales as most people shop in the evening after work.
We are job-oriented people. We have to go to the office at 9 in the morning. In the evening, we reach home from the office at 7:30. Now, when we have come for shopping, all the shops are closed here. It is already 8 p.m, so it is difficult for people like us who are doing private jobs or working in banks.
Some shopkeepers also questioned the fairness of the policy, arguing that smaller businesses are being hit harder.
How will anything be saved? Every store is open. Big stores are open. Small shopkeepers are being suppressed. Don't do this injustice. If you want to make a law, make it for everyone. Shut down the entire Pakistan at 8 p.m.
Under the new rules, restaurants and food outlets can stay open until 10 p.m, while medical stores are exempt. Wedding halls can also operate until 10 p.m, with ceremonies banned after that. The government has also reduced fuel allowances for public offices and introduced a 4-day work week as part of broader efforts to conserve energy.
Pope Leo XIV is scheduled to make an historic visit to Algeria next week, his first stop on his apostolic journey to Africa.
Residents of Algiers expressed their optimism about the upcoming historical visit by Pope Leo XIV, who is expected to meet members of Algeria's Christian community during a 3-day trip to the country.
I think that the Pope's upcoming visit is a very good thing, not only for Algeria, but for all nations, because it encourages friendly and fraternal communication between different religions.
The visit of the Pope to Algiers is a positive step to show the whole world that in this country there are no conflicts between religions. It highlights that there is freedom and democracy in the practice of religion, that all religions are respected, and that everyone is free to practice their faith without imposing it on others.
The city is ramping up preparations ahead of the Pope's visit, with work already well underway. Municipal crews are repainting walls and polishing statues across key areas. At the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa in Algiers, workers have been seen refreshing the exterior and surrounding grounds in anticipation of the visit.
A man who will once again encourage us in our faith and in our mission to build a new world, a world where there is peace and where people live together in harmony. And here, at the heart of the Basilica, I find myself at the very heart of that shared life and fellowship, where there is no distinction and everyone lives in perfect unity.
According to the official Vatican News website, this will be the third journey of Pope Leo outside Italy since the beginning of his pontificate, and he will be travelling to Algeria, Cameroon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea.
Now, ever considered mixing the two worlds of science and culinary tastes into one experience? Well, a chef in London is transforming ordinary dinners into a multi-sensor journey. Guests are guided through a journey of sensory exercises, including wearing headphones to distinguish between cold and hot water sounds, to smelling aromas and interacting with textured objects while sipping on drinks to see if it influences taste. Well, the food itself is created around lighting, plating and human sensors. One course features a jellyfish salad served beneath a cloud of smoke. Here's what the chef had to say.
So when designing these experiences, we take into consideration the lighting and the audio just as much as we do the plating and the flavors that go into the dish. Everything has to be seamlessly put together to, perhaps in some cases, heighten people's perceptions of things like crunch through using audio stimulation, or perhaps transporting them to different locations through using different scents and aromas, like, for example, geosmin, which is that kind of smell of petrichor that transports you immediately to the deep, dark forest. So multisensory cuisine and gastronomy and dining is more than just about what's on the plate. It's about the whole environment and setting that you immerse your guests into.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.